Yeah, from that scintillating conversation, we delve yet into another topic. This is the third hour of Good Morning Kenya. Welcome. My name is Mike. We want to talk about capacity for building peaceful communities. This is something that is very pertinent in this country, given that we are a diverse country. But even in that diversity, sometimes divisions do come along. But then again, how do we ensure that communities become champions of peace? I'm joined by Millicent Otieno, who is the Director of Local Capacities for Peace International, all the way from Kisumu. Good morning, Millicent.
Good morning, and greetings from Kisumu City.
How is the weather over there? Because here in Nairobi, it's a little bit cold.
Well, there were drizzles yesterday night, and this morning it's been a little bit cold.
Yes.
But you know, it gets warmer as we go on.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's delve into...
But we thank God for the weather.
All right. Let's delve into this topic now. When we talk about capacity building, now, maybe to start off, you could define capacity building within the context of peace.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, capacity building is identifying competencies, abilities, skill, and knowledge needs within communities and individuals, as well as institutions. So when we come down to capacity building in the context of peace, is the art of examining communities, individuals, and institutions' capacities to be able to live and act in a peaceable manner. So it also means the ability of communities and individuals to handle difficult situations in a non-violent manner, and finding alternatives to relate with each other in ways that promote harmony and peaceful coexistence. That is a brief introduction of capacity building in the context of peace. Being able to deal with situations, difficulties, and issues in a manner that is non-violent, but that promotes harmony and peaceful coexistence.
Mm-hmm. Which means now there must be fundamental concepts or fundamental components of capacity building within this context of peace. If you may talk about the fundamental now concepts, components of this context.
Well, first and foremost, the important thing when it comes to peace building and capacity building to promote peaceful coexistence, one must be able to understand the dynamics in the context where they find themselves, where they live, and where they operate. It can be a workplace, it can be in a community, in the marketplace, it can be in any area or any environment where you find yourself. So the fundamental thing about peace building is, first and foremost, analyzing and being able to understand the dynamics of those issues or elements that may deny people opportunity to be peaceful. It is not just the physical violence. Many times when you talk about peace or capacities or fundamental things about peace building, people tend to concentrate on the physical aspects. But we always tend to want to look at the broader picture. There are emotional issues that may deny people peace. There are the physical elements that deny people peace. There are also systems and institutional things that may deny us peace, that may infringe on our human rights and our competency to live with happiness. So in a community, if people are able to find ways of overcoming those challenges, first and foremost, identifying those issues and elements, then being able to overcome those challenges or circumvent them in a manner that they are able to live a fruitful life, then that way we will say that they are able to do conflict analysis. After analyzing, then they are able to engage with those issues constructively. However, we also know that sometimes people engage with those issues in a non-constructive way, and then it results to violence. So that is where we come in and tell people, how can you then be able to manage disputes, differences, disagreements in a manner that is non-violent, so that you avoid harming yourself or harming others.
Indeed, your foundation is founded on the idea of peaceful communities. Maybe in a nutshell, what necessitated this call?
Well, first and foremost, when we started working, we found ourselves here in Kisumu City, and especially in our border areas of Muhoroni and Kericho borders, as well as Nandi. The communities were plagued with constant inter-tribal conflicts. And when we went to work with these communities, we realized that there was no way development could take root if the issues of the intercommunal conflicts were not resolved. And so when we went there, we already found the communities grappling with ways of surviving and existing with each other, as well as also working with the religious leaders and other actors to figure out how best to overcome the challenge of inter-ethnic animosity. So we went there also with the other stakeholders to promote development, but we said we had to first of all tackle the issue of mindset change, attitude change, and competencies to be able to find alternative ways of dealing with cattle rustling, for example. We experienced cattle rustling as a practice that was the norm in that area, but one community was infringing on the rights of another, and so we had to do an inter-community dialogue process and help the communities to find better ways of approaching this issue. After investigation, we realized that it was not just cattle rustling, it was stock theft, because the communities, both communities at the border, they said, this is the community of thieves. These are not our people. So by investigating, we were able to understand and deal with the notion that cattle rustling was normalized. And the community said, no, we can't normalize this. These are thieves. So let the law deal with them and let them stop bringing issues that bring animosity amongst us as communities. This is one example of how we looked at it and why we started engaging now in this process. We also realized it is not a sprint. It is a marathon. So we started in actually 2003, and we worked there from 2003 up to 2024. We are still engaged with these communities. So we were able to see how the conference transformed itself, and people moved from the physical violence to dialogue, and then from dialogue to cooperation, from cooperation to joint development interventions, and it also helps them to be more resilient and overcome intolerance. Yeah. So the intolerance was leading to zoning, and that now they have been able to overcome some of those aspects.
So, which means you, given what you've said, which means you've had to integrate both the traditional way of conflict resolution and the modern way of conflict resolution. The question is, how do you strike that balance?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, when you're doing peace building and you have gone to school, because nowadays people have even PhDs, masters in peace building and conflict transformation. I can tell you for sure that when you go to the communities, they have their own peace building facets that are not necessarily exactly presented in the way it is done in the class. So we started by understanding that these models that we go to school to learn are actually drawn from the communities. Let me give you an example. When we were doing building for peace building in Turkana, we realized that the elders had a technique of reading the intestines, which was one of the conflict early warning tools. And they were able to predict and foretell how the conflict will play out in the future. And when we went and examined this, we say this is a traditional mechanism. It's working for them. So what we did is we picked this practice and then we juxtapose it against the modern ways of looking at conflict early warning, for example. The modern way of conflict early warning was to look at the red flags. You know, we examine people's behavior. When we are in an area and we see that it is nearing election and people start separating themselves, you go to the market, you find the Luos are on one side, the Kalenjins are on one side, or you find the Pokots are on this side and Turkana on this side. So we examine those practices and we analyze and we say, why are they not trading with each other? Why are the children from these communities not going to this school? And so we realized that, so we can actually integrate traditional ways. We pick the information that was given to us by the traditional leaders that are examining the intestines and giving us, you know, the predictions. And then we look at how the communities are operating. And then we come back to the books and then we say, okay, now, what are the indicators? How can we then use these indicators to prevent escalation of the tensions into violence? It is the same thing we did with the religious leaders. It's the same thing the Council of Elders in Luo or in other communities were also engaged in. And so we pick all these practices and we see what works best for the community. And it brings about an integrated approach to embrace each other's differences and to find unity in diversity and help the communities to move together as one because of their humanity. At the center of peace building is that human life is sacred and that we are interconnected and interdependent.
Indeed. And also in your efforts of peace building, is there a chance that you have worked with the media, or what do you think is the role of the media in all this? In fact, this is a very interesting one. You know, in the year
2012, when we started working, the media was seen as carriers of message. And so we started examining whether media practitioners, are they just message carriers, or are they also stakeholders? And so we started engaging the media practitioners on what we call conflict-sensitive journalism and peace reporting. It is not lost to us as a country that in 2007-2008 election, when Kenya almost went to the dogs, the media was blamed and was put on the spot. They were told, you are the ones who almost burnt this country. Why? Because of the way the messages were being carried out. So when we are doing peace building, we cannot forget to look at media practitioners as part and parcel of this country. Because these journalists and reporters and cameramen, they are an integral part of our community. However, the advantage they have is that they shape the agendas and they influence the narratives. If they are properly equipped with skills and knowledge to know how best to package the information without over-sensationalizing, then we see that the country can be able to carve a different path. The community can also develop new ways of thinking, and individuals' mindsets also become transformed. And we have seen a very big contribution. The media practitioners have contributed immensely to the peaceableness of this country and also to our work as an institution in promoting peaceful coexistence in the community by shaping the narratives, by packaging information in a manner that connects the people rather than divide the people. They do not camouflage or hide the truth, but they package the truth in a right way. For example, if there was a conflict between two communities, allow me to use the border area between Kalenjins and Luos in Muhoroni, for example. When a media practitioner comes and says, Kalenjins have killed 10 Luos, automatically the Luos will say, hey, tunauawa, these people are killing us. And the reaction will be, the Luos will mobilize themselves. Even us, we cannot be cowards. There will be a retaliation. Then the Kalenjin practitioners will report, oh, the Luos have retaliated and they have killed 10 people. Sometimes it's not even verified. But when that happens, the whole country will be saying, oh, so Luos are killing Nandis and Nandis are killing Luos. And sometimes even in this conflict, maybe some Luyas were there and they were killed. Some Nubians were there and they were killed. And nobody's talking about them. But we helped them to understand you do not need to sensationalize. You can say, we have lost this number of lives. Instead of saying Luos are killing Nandis, you can say cattle rustlers have killed some community members. So these are some of the ways that we have worked with journalists and media practitioners to package their information in a non-sensationalizing way and also in a way that bridges the gap amongst conflicting communities and the society.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And also,
it is also based on the do no harm principle.
Oh. Okay. Actually, I was coming to that. I was coming to the do no harm principle. If you may expound a little bit on it.
Well, do no harm principle was, it's an oath that the doctors normally take. We borrowed it from that oath. You know, when doctors are trained, the oath that they take is that they will do everything within their powers to save life. It does not matter who they are dealing with. Even if it is your enemy and you are a doctor, you must save that life if they are brought to you. Now, we found ourselves working in the context of conflict. For a very long time, Kenya prided itself that it was very peaceful. But remember, Uganda was at war, the refugees came to Kenya. Before the new country was born of Sudan, there was a lot of conflict and people came to Kenya to seek refuge. Then we realized that when conflict happens, some relief food must be brought. Humanitarian activities must be undertaken. But as communities and organizations intervened, I realized that this intervention, when you bring it, the warring parties, they will fight over this food. No wonder you find some areas the conflict never ends. Why? Because they know once the conflict starts, the relief food will come, and when the relief food comes, some of the militia, they benefit from this. So the do no harm principle was born on the background of a question that said, how can aid or how can development or how can any assistance be provided in a manner that rather than divide the communities, the interventions will help the communities to forge alliances, find connectors, and disengage from the violence that surrounds them. So this principle helps us to examine our programs. It helps organizations to do due diligence such that they will eventually check and try their best to do no harm or to do less harm and do more good with the interventions that they do. So I want to say today, Constitution, for example, the Kenya 2010 Constitution, it was one of the things that we were very proud of. But we realized that as we continue to implement this Constitution, there are certain elements of the Constitution that are perceived and sometimes seen to be opening ways and improving the human rights, while on the other hand, there are other aspects that are seen to be eroding our values as a society and as a community. Case in point, people are saying freedom of speech and use of social media platforms. But sometimes you find that these social media platforms, they have negative side effects. These negative side effects are unintended. So the do no harm principle helps you to check on the unintended negative side effects that your program or your activities or your intervention may have in a community. And so it helps you to be proactive to avoid the unintended negative side effects.
Now, you've mentioned social media, and the biggest chunk that uses social media is the young people. Now, how have you incorporated them in peace-building efforts, and also the aspect of including women in these efforts? How have you included them in these efforts?
Oh, definitely. You know, the young people are the backbone. And they do not only engage in social media spaces, but they also engage on a one-to-one interaction and ways of collaboration. So when we started, actually in many communities where we've worked, remember, Local Capacities for Peace International has worked beyond Kenya. As much as we grounded our and also in the Nairobi communities. In Nairobi, we were working with youth that were using art and drama and music to pass messages. I listen to the Gen Zs when they are saying they are tribeless and leaderless. I can assure you that this theme and rallying call of tribeless Kenyans was born before even the Gen Zs, and I can tell you of the youth in Kibera that started that rallying call. They were calling themselves the tribeless group, you know. And they were so powerful in not only in Kibera, but we went with them even to Mombasa, trying to help the young people understand that they have to take matters in their own hands when it comes to forging alliances and overcoming stereotypes. Why? You found that the youth that were living in Kibera, they were just young people living together. If they were affected by poverty or inflation, they were all affected. But during elections, they were being mobilized along tribal lines. And so some of the youth groups decided, you know what? We will work across tribal lines. And they started forging those alliances. And now we see the Gen Zs, you know, they publicized it. And we can say that we played a small part in training these people, not only in Nairobi, but also in Kisumu. In Kisumu, we had what we call the task teams. And some of these were youths in the political parties agitating for their space of leadership according to UN Resolution 2250, because they are supposed to be in decision making. Our role was to equip them with the tools and the resolutions that they need to be able to push for those spaces. And so in Kisumu, you saw them trying to also not only go for political spaces, but also get engaged in, you know, being part of the market committees, being part of the community policing committees. And so they were just able to find their space to contribute meaningfully in our community. As far as the women go, the women groups also, we started the transgenerational mentorship, where the older women were also working with younger women to identify areas, strategic areas, where they could contribute. One of those areas was that they as parents were educating the young people and helping their children to know that this country can only stand if we work together. We can overcome poverty, and we can create our own spaces of employment. We can go back to agriculture, because when we are food secure, we will be less angry because we have full stomachs. So you see that there is an interconnectedness between poverty, anger, emotions, as well as good governance. So the women were mobilized in form of women groups. We've been working with them. We also work with professional women in different spaces to influence policies. We have worked with the parliamentarians and elected leaders. We give them information from the ground, and that informs policy formulation and implementation. We also work with different arms of the government, including the national government, Ministry of Interior, so that they can be able to help, because you cannot deal with violent conflict without looking at the element of policing. However, our angle was the community policing. And our rallying call was usalama wetu, amani yetu, ni jukumu letu kama Wakenya. These are some of the things that we have done and we continue to do as we promote life skills, livelihoods, alongside peace building and conflict transformation.
Now, you've mentioned that your efforts of peace building span across East African nations. Maybe what are the interlinking issues? What have you noticed as similarities in terms of efforts in capacity building for peace?
Yeah, indeed, across board. And when we come to the East African region, I mentioned before that when we started peace building in Kenya, way back in 2001, we started working with our counterparts in Sudan. That time, Sudan was still experiencing active conflict where the bombs were being dropped with antennas. And some of us went there to work with the communities and the interreligious groups to see how to enable the communities to safeguard themselves and also to find meaningful ways of living. At the same time, there were conflicts that had happened in Rwanda and in Uganda that created displacement. But apart from the displacement, there were also our cross-border conflicts with the Karamoja community. So you find that our people from the Turkana and Pokot could cross over to go to the Ugandan side, allegedly to bring back cows, and the Karamoja community from the Ugandan side could also cross over. So you found that some cultures and some practices were similar. The act of bringing cows home from one community to the other was causing a lot of tension along the borders. Why? Because you could find that our counterparts from Karamoja they were arming themselves. Small arms and light weapons were rampant. That meant that also the Turkana and the Pokot, if they want to go across the border, they also needed to be armed. And sometimes they just needed to arm themselves to protect their cows from being taken. So we saw that the porous borders were causing and contributing to these tensions because of some of these practices. And indeed, IGAD had worked along the border. We have worked with also the IGAD Conflict Early Warning Department in the formation of what we call the SEWERUs, the Conflict Early Warning Early Response Networks. So these networks, you find that we have been able to bring competencies and capacity and skills across the IGAD countries, Kenya being one of them, working with the SEWERUs, they are called SEWERUs, the Conflict Early Warning Early Response Units in the Ugandan side, also looking at our border with Ethiopia. You know, that has been another area where because of the porous borders, you could see people crossing. Our border with Somalia, if you go all the way, you know, Dajajabula, and looking at the other area of Dadaab, past Dadaab, and Wajir North, Wajir South, we could see those areas. And so our role was to network, leverage on the work that others are doing, and also work with them. And we have been called upon for advisory services to work with the communities to enhance the conflict early warning, early response mechanism. Also to create and enhance community homegrown solutions to living violent ways or retaliation, and finding connector activities. We've been working also to enhance the movement. You know, when there is a school put somewhere, we educate people to understand the school does not choose. All our children go to those schools. So our work has expanded all the way to Burundi. In Burundi, we have also worked with the ICGLR and also other countries in the region, and the work goes on.
Indeed.
It is one step at a time.
Indeed. And in these efforts of building peaceful communities and making them champions of peace, what have you seen or identified as gaps and challenges within these efforts?
First and foremost, it's our mindset. The biggest challenge we are having is when people have decided that Mjaluo na Mkikuyu hawawezi kusikilizana, you know, then they take hard stance, you know, and so they believe, or the narrative is around kila uchaguzi Wajaluo na Wakikuyu lazima wapigane. When they start feeding those narratives, they reinforce stereotypes and prejudices. And more often than not, those are just perceptions and not realities. Because we live as Kenyans and we live together as communities all the time. And sometimes it takes only a small trigger. Something, for example, like election, may bring to forth the worst in us. So the challenge here is to develop counter narratives. We do not share enough stories that amplify our togetherness, that amplify how we have been working together as communities all these other times, because elections come and go. So this is one of the major challenges that we've been facing. Another challenge that we have been facing is the fact that people tend to thrive more on negative information. The journalist told us that when it bleeds, it sells. You know, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't sell. So if the dog bites a man, it's not news. If the man bites a dog, it becomes news. So these kind of tendencies tend to glorify wrongdoing and wrong attitudes and reinforces negative mindsets. And so people always find themselves in the routine of repeating negative things that do not amplify our peaceableness, our Ubuntu.
Indeed.
Nonetheless,
in the interest of time...
it is possible to do otherwise.
Yeah, in the interest of time, what is your rallying call to Kenyans today? In under 1 minute.
Well, Kenyans, this country is ours. This is the only country we have. Whether you like it or not, you cannot run and you cannot go anywhere. For those of us who worked with the refugee camps, we know how difficult it is to be out of your country. I'm pleading with all of us. Let us find the common areas. There's a lot more that connects us than the small things that divide us. Let us find those connecting aspects in our life. Let us embrace each other. Let us work with the religious leaders. Tuweke Mungu mbele na atatuwezesha.
Indeed.
When all is said and done, Kenya is ours to build together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Millicent Otieno, for joining us here on Good Morning Kenya and talking matters to do with capacity building for peaceful communities. This is where we end this conversation. Thank you for tuning in. Good Morning Kenya takes a bow for today. We do this again tomorrow morning. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Mike. May we enjoy the rest of your viewing.